welcome to the latest episode of Rant, and today I'm joined by Sonny Webster. Sonny is a British Olympian weightlifter and is also now a weightlifting coach. So Sonny, thanks a million for coming on, and how is all with you today?
So, no problem at all. Thank you very much for having me.
No bother. I know it's been a while in the work, so I'm grateful to finally get you on.
Yes, I'm busy, very busy at the moment, but no, it's a pleasure.
Thanks all the same. So one of the first questions I always tend to ask guests when they come on is, you know, if they've built up a career in whatever walk of life it is, but was there ever a moment, was there ever kind of a human being early on before you went on obviously your fitness journey that kind of made you get into weightlifting? Was there a person, was there a moment where you're playing sport? Like what got you into the sport to begin with?
Yeah, well, I mean, as a kid growing up, I wasn't actually involved in weightlifting at all. I was a very keen golfer at a young age. My dad was very much so into his golf and naturally used to take me to the driving range to play with him. And I knew I was always into sport. I'd play in all the different school sports teams, but there was never anything for me that really stuck out as, okay, this is me, this is what I want to be doing. Up until a moment when I was sat in a maths class, and I would have been about 8 or 9 at the time, and the PE teacher come running into the classroom, and it was right at the point where, just before we were about to announce the bid for the Olympic Games. So the PE teacher ran in and she said, "Look, sorry, we're going to have to interrupt this maths class. We need to use the TV." And the TV went on just at the moment where David Beckham and Kelly Holmes were jumping up and down, hugging each other. And I don't know what it is about that moment for me, but that definitely stands out to me as a moment that I thought, shit, I want to go to the Olympics. I think it more than anything, it was just the passion that I could see in David Beckham and Kelly Holmes' faces that, made me think, well, one day I want to feel that way. And for the next couple of weeks in school, like we said, I participate in all the different sports. I've got little stumpy legs, so high jump was no good for me. The 80-meter sprint was great until it turned into 100 meters. And I could throw a cricket ball really well until it turned into being a javelin. So there was nothing really that was standing out for me as to where I should be dedicating my time. And at that moment, golf wasn't an Olympic sport. So we ended up moving down to a new school down in Ivybridge, and naturally not knowing anyone at the school, I used to wander the corridors, and I stumbled across a weightlifting gym one day. And I walked in and sat myself down on the bench. And the coach came up to me after about, 2 weeks of sitting down, watching these kids do weightlifting, and said, why didn't you come over and go yourself? And for me, weightlifting was never really, on my radar. It was just something that I used to do to fill in my time, I guess, at lunch. And yeah, after about 2 weeks, coach came up and said, "Look, why don't you come over and go yourself?" And I was like, no, it's not for me, miss. Sorry, I'm a golfer. And the coach turned around and said, "Look, Sonny, you got detention now tomorrow lunchtime. You got to come over and go because you've been a bit of a nuisance taking the mickey out of the kids that are trying it out." So 2 weeks into school, got my first detention. And the next day I went along, and purely because I'd sat and watched weightlifting done wrong and done right for nearly 2 weeks, I had a pretty good idea of what was going to be asked of me. And I ended up beating everyone on my first day. And the coach turned around to me and said, "Look, Sonny, you got detention now every lunchtime until you want to be here." And that's how I spent the rest of my time in school.
Right, so it was nearly like a forced upon venture by yourself in an interesting circumstance. But yeah, no, that's an interesting way to get into something. And people who are aware of your work only realise that you did go on to the Olympics. And as you said, seeing David Beckham on the TV kind of gave you that jolt of inspiration to go about it. And one of the things I'm kind of interested in now, and obviously the coaching side of things now is quite important to you, but I'm sure like when you got into the weightlifting side of things, you were setting small goals, and then eventually the big one was obviously to go to the Olympics. But say if you fast forward to current day, you're now kind of still training hard yourself. You're obviously doing seminars, you're doing coaching, online coaching. Like what is your motivation, or how has that changed from back when, say, pre-Olympics to now, where there isn't, say, a clear competition or a clear goal? And well, there probably is goals, but they're just not as evident from people looking from the outside in.
Yeah, I mean, this is a great question because we're talking the expanse of nearly 15 years from that moment that I started to obviously going to the Olympics to now naturally progressing into more of a coach's role. I think just to touch on, I guess, those first few weeks when I first started out in the sport. And, I think it's very important, especially for the people that are listening to, anything that you're getting into, you do need to have an element of goals and, targets in terms of what you want to achieve. And I remember very early on in one of those first couple of sessions, my coach turned around to me and said, "Sonny, all that you can achieve or the most that you can achieve in the sport of Olympic weightlifting is to get to the Olympic Games and to win a Commonwealth gold medal. And if you can do those two things as a British weightlifter, then you've achieved everything that you want to be." And then not too long after that moment, coach turned around to me and said, "Whatever happens, as long as you leave the sport in a better place than when you found it, then you've done your bit for weightlifting." And those two, I guess, quotes or sayings have always stuck through me throughout my career. Is, I guess, an overlying goals, or I guess direction in terms of where I was going within the sport of weightlifting. And having obviously achieved the Olympics, that was one of the main goals that I always wanted to tick off. The other was the Commonwealth Gold, which I unfortunately haven't yet achieved, but who knows, maybe one day that may still be on the horizon. But in terms of leaving the sport in a better place than where I found it has been, where the majority of my energy has gone into my practice over the last few years. And I guess the sport of weightlifting, notoriously, it's a very dull, boring, not very, initially when I started, it wasn't extremely accessible. It wasn't great as a spectator sport. And, participation levels in the sport were very low. And there wasn't a lot of fame or, I guess people knowing what weightlifting was back in the day. So, in terms of what I tried to do is over the last few years, is especially with the online academy, I've tried to create a space where everyone feels welcome to participate, to attempt to learn the sport of Olympic weightlifting, where I'm helping educate people as best as I can. And I guess with everything that I'm doing now with my charity, Lifting Dreams, we've just finished building our first gym out in South Africa as a place for deprived children and people in run-down areas to give the kids a safe place to do their homework, to train, and really give them direction and inspire people really. And that's kind of where my energy, I guess, is starting to move towards now. And I guess moving towards my, like I said, that goal that was set in my first very few weeks of starting the sport to leave it in a better place than where I found it.
Yeah, no, well said. I agree. And you're saying there now, it's the energy is obviously gearing towards more so the coaching side of it and the many different projects you're involved in, whether it's personal or else as part of a team. And I'm sure the transition from being the person who is coached and being kind of feeling like an individual, a part of a team, to now being an individual who goes out and sources people to become a team because you're the coach now. Like, has that, when you first kind of started coaching, because I'm sure all you went off was what you'd read, what had worked for you, what had been, advised by other former coaches. Was there anything when you started coaching, whether it was one-on-ones online or through your own writing or whatever, was there ever a moment where you kind of tried something or you thought something would work and then suddenly it kind of splashed in your face and you're like, right, well, okay, maybe just because it worked for me doesn't mean it's going to work for this athlete or this average Joe or this person? Was there ever a moment where you're kind of like, okay, I need to kind of reassess my coaching and be a bit more tailored towards the individual?
Yeah, I think the world of coaching, full stop, regardless of the sport, is, it's a very messy place. And in my opinion, one of the first debates that always comes up is, do you have to be a good athlete to become a good coach? And I did 15 years as an athlete and then spent, probably 6 to 7 years working with some of the greatest coaches in the world of weightlifting, as well as studying a 4 year degree in sports performance of Olympic weightlifting. And when I look back on all of those different aspects, whereas from my athlete point of view, understanding what I teach to people, what the effect it has on the person, what that individual is going through, helping them process the thought of snatching 100 kilos. It's much easier when I'm directing someone because I know what they're going through and know what it feels because I've experienced that myself. And even more so when you get to an elite level, it's very difficult. For example, Rich, for you to, unless you do clean and jerk 200 kilos, for
I
you to
don't.
teach.
I'm trying, but I don't.
But for example, for you to teach me how to do that feat is very difficult for you because you have no actual understanding or comprehension of how heavy that is.
Mm.
And the process, unfortunately, to clean and jerk 200 kilos is very different from the process of clean and jerk 100. It requires different strengths in different areas. And I think that develops you far greater as a coach to have that hat that you can put on when you're working with an elite level athlete, as well as, for me, from a coach's point of view, working with the beginner, having spent time watching, other coaches coach, learning how to sympathize with your athletes, learning how to give direction. There's 100 different ways to get someone to, for example, stop bending their arms or to get in a set position for a lift. And I think for me, a good coach will have lots of different ways to deliver the same thing. Not only that, it massively depends on the way in which the athlete that you're working with learns. Everyone learns in a different way. Some people learn visually. Some people need things written. Some people need demonstration. And again, that gives you another string to your bow as a coach if you've got the ability to deliver on all those different levels. And then for me, more than anything, I think people feel as though they need to have qualifications, extensive qualifications to be able to call themselves a coach. I can tell you now, from 4 years at university, I could bore you to death with the ins and outs and the technical elements of Olympic weightlifting. Does it make me a better coach? No. But at the same time, having that deeper understanding, should people want that, I've got it there. But on a day-to-day basis, it's not something that I deliver to the people that I work with, but having that understanding,
Mm.
like I said, is of benefit. And I think one of the biggest things for me, Rich, is like for when you go back to, you look at old school Olympic weightlifting, the coaching methods that are out there, the Russian methods, the Chinese methods of teaching in weightlifting, the old school, they're great. And there's lots to learn from them. But the thing that's very different about the process that those Russian coaches and Chinese coaches will have gone through with their athletes is they're taking someone who has come out of the womb, born to be a weightlifter, have had a bar in their hands from the age of 6 to 8, and are starting to learn how to do the sport from that age, and they are full-time athletes. Whereas I'd say the 95% of people that actually are weightlifting nowadays have got into the sport after the age of 18, introduced to it through CrossFit, have 9 to 5 day jobs, and they just want to improve their Olympic weightlifting to stay fit, stay healthy, and to move better. Now, the process of teaching Bob from the office job versus Lu Xiaojun coming out of the womb at 7 years old snatching are very fucking different
Yeah.
because their starting positions are so different. And therefore, when I start to think about, the way that I've developed over the last few years as a coach, it's been understanding that and then really trying to speak and understand the struggles that Bob has rather than the struggles that Lu Xiaojun had, which would have been very more similar to me as an athlete. And I think the way in which I went about that was to actually start CrossFitting myself, starting to spend more time in the CrossFit community, starting to learn about the sport more myself so that I'm able to actually deliver people what they need with an actual true understanding of their start position. And therefore, I think, as the coaches are very quick to complicate things or to use technical jargon that people don't understand to justify their position as a coach. But really, nowadays, it's not what people want and it's not what people are looking for. And I always find with the people that I'm teaching weightlifting, I'm just trying to give them simple things that they can relate to and understand. And I think that for me in the sport of weightlifting will make you a better coach, or in any sport, is being able to have that vocabulary that athletes understand, but then also be able to be as relatable as possible to the person that you're delivering your knowledge to.
Yeah, no, I've been there, whether it's on the sport field or even in the gym. I think it is important that you kind of can relate to whatever athlete or whatever individual, as you said, the average Joe from the 9 to 5 desk job as well. And as you were saying there, with regards to some of the stuff you teach, like some of them are complicated enough lifts. So like if you look at, say, a clean and jerk, there's a lot of moving parts, a snatch, a lot of ins and outs to that. So one thing I'd always think of is whoever I see doing a clean, they could be lifting serious weight or not. There always tends to be slightly different styles to it. I know there is kind of certain techniques you need to use, but like, is there any way to kind of rep your way to success with these lifts? As in, like, can you get by doing these lifts, or say doing a clean or doing a snatch that may be the wrong way in many people's eyes, or someone like your eyes, it may look wrong or the technique is wrong, yet still get the maximum out of your lifting potential?
I think with any sport, you're going to have those outliers. So, for example, the Jim Furyk of golf, his swing was
It's
completely
horrendous.
unconventional. Yeah, horrendous, technically horrendous, but completely unconventional. But yet, still was a major winner, and was
Mm,
still on the top of the PGA Tour in the top guys for a very long time. But yet, clinically, nothing was fucking right about that swing. And you'll
mm,
have the same freaks in weightlifting. I've seen some incredible athletes in my time at Olympic and world championship level that, technically are not very proficient, but are still lifting extremely heavy weights. But the thing that I worry about is the longevity for those athletes. We're lifting extremely heavy weights daily. There's going to be a period if you're not using an efficient technique where you may get injured. And this is where what will happen, even with elite level athletes, the guys that are on top, the guys that are winning medals, hang around for a very short period of time. However, I'm trying to teach someone, on a low standard level that, wants to be able to continue this sport for 10 to 15 years, use it as a form of social side of the sport. They want to be able to compete for a long period of time. And they're generally 10 to 15 years older than the majority of people that you will see competing at the Olympics with potentially bad technique. So again, it's two different kettles of fish. I want to give people a technique that they can produce consistently over a long period of time that isn't going to result in them getting injured. And therefore, that's why, in terms of the methods that I'm teaching people, a lot of the principles are similar to what you'll see of the Russian, not so much the Chinese, but the Eastern European style of Olympic weightlifting. But again, simplified a little bit. And in terms of the process, when I'm working with a beginner, and there's anyone that is listening that's thinking about getting into the sport of weightlifting or already likes the sound of it, the first thing is to learn how to control your body first, learn how to move well. And then after you've mastered those areas, only then do you put a barbell in someone's hand and then start breaking down the elements, the movement patterns of the Olympic movements, and then sewing all of them together before you've got that snatch. So there's a very definite process in my head in terms of what I would go through in order to teach someone. And there's definitely techniques that, I would avoid that, yes, some athletes would get away with, but if we're talking longevity and we're talking health of the body, won't last than the long haul.
That's interesting. So, like, would you say, and like this could even be relatable to yourself, if there's someone maybe struggling to get position, or maybe if their mobility isn't that good. Like, so would stuff like ankle mobility, the kind of catch elbow mobility, would that be one of the first things you'd look at, say, as a coach, and before, as you said, you even think about getting a barbell in between them or sticking plates on the side of the barbell before you kind of made the full assessment on whatever athlete or kind of person you were coaching?
100%. And, if people have come to my seminars, the first hour and a half of the seminar is just mobility and movement based, because if you, like I said, if they can't get into those positions, and this is the problem where when a lot of people try and self teach Olympic weightlifting, or they get egged on in CrossFit to put more weight on the bar to hit the RX weight, they bypass a lot of the key and essential lessons that they need to be doing for 2-3 weeks before they progress to the bar, because they feel under pressure to stick to class standards and to get to the standard they need to be to fit in within the class, rather than actually addressing their own issues, taking their time in the process of learning before turning up to CrossFit class and going, okay, I can now control my body, I know how to move, I can get in the positions that are required of me. And then when you start loading the weights on the bar, it's a nice easy process, because as strength goes up and you maintain technique, you'll make a steady linear progress line in terms of the load you're lifting, with hopefully no injuries. However, if you jump into class, go, oh, fuck, improving my mobility, I'm just going to power snatch for a bit, you'll get to the point 6 months down the line where, okay, now I'm not strong enough to power snatch the weight, which is not the most efficient way to get it up. I need to now do a full snatch if I'm going to snatch anymore, but all of a sudden I've got strong in the wrong position, and now it's very difficult for me to learn the right technique. And that, I'd say, is 80% of people that come to me because they've tried to hit the shortcut first. It's a dead end, and then they have to go all the way back round, and now it's a very long way to get to where they want to be, which, is fortunate, because else I wouldn't have a business if it wasn't for that. But at the same time, I'd love more and more people to get the right introduction to the sport, and take their time, be patient, and it'd make, I think, the sport hell of a lot more enjoyable for a lot of people, especially in the first few months.
Yeah, no, there's nothing more humbling than a barbell, really, to be honest, because it's the one thing that never changes its tone or weight, so to speak. But with yourself now being a coach, and like, there obviously are a lot of lifts that you'd focus on, and like, without obviously having the time to get into every single detail with one, but looking still at the coaching point of view, say if you look at, say, the squat, loads of coaches have different takes on it. There's different types of squat. So, like, do you just pretty much have a gold standard way of squatting? Do you use box squats? Do you load up on the front squats? Like, what do you see as some would say the advantages and disadvantages of, say, the varying types of squatting while training?
Yeah, it's a great question. And the squat's probably one of the most universal barbell movements that you'll find people doing. And yes, there is 101 different ways to teach the squat. And the first question I want to ask is, what's your goal? And that makes a massive difference as to the way in which, you teach someone to squat. Are you squatting because you want to develop your leg strength for Olympic weightlifting? Or are you squatting because you want a bigger ass? Or are you squatting because you just want to lift as heavy a weight possible? And there would be my 3 funnels: aesthetic, performance, or heavy as fuck weight. And then that would be Olympic weightlifting, bodybuilding, and powerlifting. So, for example, if I was teaching someone a powerlift, I would be getting them to squat low bar. I would probably only just be able to get them to legally break parallel. And, we'd use equipment, i.e., a squat suit, knee wraps, etc., so that they could squat heavier. If I'm teaching someone to squat for aesthetics, we probably would never go to a point where we were loading submaximally above 80%, and we'd be doing a much higher rep range, and we'd be exaggerating the muscles being used that we want to focus on from an aesthetic point of view. And we'd also be using a very different set of assistance exercises. Now, if you've come to me and you've gone, I want to squat more, I'm an Olympic weightlifter, I want stronger legs, then the first process for me is ensuring that you can get through a full range of squat, going into your most efficient position as low as possible, whilst maintaining tension and tracking, but also sitting upright Okay, and that's one of the biggest things when you squat as a weightlifter or back squat as a weightlifter is you sit a hell of a lot more upright when you would in any other sport, because at the end of the day we need to be upright in our receiving position of the snatch and the clean in order to be able to catch in a stable position without putting too much pressure on the shoulders.
Yeah.
Okay, and that's where the process in which I'm teaching someone would be very different for a squat for Olympic weightlifting. Now, once I'm happy with their technique, etc., and this is one of the biggest things that I find is missed out of squat programs, and I've tried them all, and which is why I created
Mm.
mine the way I did, was for a lot of people, if you front squat, it's not your leg strength that will stop you from squatting more because you can back squat way heavier. It's the fact that your core stability and strength and your mobility in your front rack will give way before your legs will. So therefore, putting an emphasis in my squat program on the accessory exercises that's going to A, develop your core stability, B, work on your mobility in your front rack position, but also C, the tempo in which you squat that's going to carry over to your Olympic lifts is very important. And there's just as important exercises outside of what you do in terms of the back squat and the front squat that will assist you and help you develop your overall squat. And another thing that's been really important for me in terms of working with athletes on their squat is making sure they're developing an even muscle balance between quadriceps and hamstring. A lot of people who squat a lot will be very quad dominant, not actually work their hamstring so much, get a lot of knee pain, etc. So doing accessory hamstring work to build a better muscle balance is a great way to help with that. And there's all these different methods and styles that we'll do that I think gives you an all-round better improvement in your squat than just working horses for courses on an individual goal. Because you'll notice with a lot of weightlifters, they'll have great muscle development in their quads, a good range of squat, and in some cases squat just as heavy as a powerlifter. So I guess that's kind of my method to the madness in terms of the way in which I'll be teaching anyone really how to squat.
Yeah. And like, say, just sticking with the squat and from the eyes of a coach here, there's like I had
Yeah.
Kelly Starrett on there a few weeks ago, and he's big on certain things with the squat as well. And one thing I thought was interesting coming from him is that he was saying how so many coaches, when they get into the hole, it's called, or say the bottom of the lift, of the squat, when you
Yeah.
go fully down, he's saying he's half of the coaches he's met when you get to the very bottom. Some people are like, you need to be locked in, you need to be full attention, you need to be nice and controlled. Well, then there's also some others that like to use the momentum of kind of that bounce when you get to maybe just past
Yeah.
90%. And I was just wondering whether it's you personally, does your kind of outlook change? So like, do you do what you would do individually different to what you do as a teacher? Or is there kind of one way you like to see people overcome that hole or the bottom of the lift?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think one of the most, and Kelly Starrett's done some amazing work. But I think for me, what's important is first of all, if you can use the momentum or what I refer to as the bounce correctly, it can be very beneficial to using the momentum and the stretch reflex in the bottom of the squat. However, a lot of people will see weightlifters such as myself, for example, use the bounce, try and replicate it, but actually lose a lot of tension and go into a compromising position when attempting to squat that way. So I do think it definitely has a place, especially for Olympic weightlifting, to be able to use the momentum, be efficient in the squat, providing that you can keep your tension and not go into a compromising position, especially on the knees when you're driving up and out of the bottom position. The moment in which you, I guess, accelerate into the hole or catch momentum needs to be as low down in the squat as possible. And that still requires for you to descend with a lot of control into the bottom position first. So working slowly, eccentrically, and then driving out through the sticking point. You're hoping to always stand up faster than you go down when you're squatting for Olympic weightlifting or in general. But in terms of using the pause squat or using a squatting style in which the tempo of the squat is linear throughout the whole range, is great also for Olympic weightlifting anyway as accessory. So although I'll squat quite fast and I'll use the bounce purely because that for me is my most efficient way to squat, and it'll carry over into my Olympic lifts better, and that's always the way that I've done it, I will still do drop down sets where I will point my toes a little bit straighter and I'll put the emphasis more into the hips on the squat, and I won't go quite so low, and I'll use a consistent tempo. Because at the end of the day, I'm going to work different muscles harder squatting that way, which inevitably on the whole will only add to what I'm doing anyway. So I think it's good to play around with both styles, providing you're executing it with the correct technique rather than just trying to replicate something that you've seen online, because you can get yourself into some very sticky situations trying to drop or go fast through that lower range of the squat if you're not keeping tension throughout that lowest range.
Yeah. No, I agree.
Even when you're doing a pause squat, even when you're doing a pause squat, 3-second pause, you've still got to keep the tension there. You're not necessarily relaxing in that bottom position. You're just momentarily working isometrically before you change direction.
Yeah. No, it's one of the darkest places to be when you get to the very bottom or on any lift, and you're kind of thinking, okay, this is not going to be good. But no, some interesting points there.
Agreed.
And one of the last points just on the coaching side of things, only before I kind of quickly ask you just a few things about yourself, maybe as an individual in the gym, is just, say, for instance, when you have a client or someone you're working with who is, as I said, it's all about kind of the power stuff. It's about getting as much plates on that barbell as possible and getting the lifts heavier and heavier progressively. Like every athlete, whether it's a pro athlete or someone who's keen in the gym to get their lifts up on whatever bench, clean squats, whatever, you eventually at some stage, and we've all been there, where you kind of face the plateau and you've kind of been going for weeks and weeks and weeks, and suddenly your training's just hitting against a wall. And like, as yourself as a coach, like, in order to get past that and add that extra 2.5 or that 5 kilo onto the lift, like, is it a case where you need to then just assess the training and change it? Or, as you actually even said earlier in the podcast, do you need to just be patient and just keep hitting against that wall until eventually it falls over? But I was just curious to ask, like, is there a set kind of moment in a program where you go, okay, we've hit the wall, we've plateaued, we need to change things up? Or do you just keep going and trust the process?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think people will very quickly jump to the idea that they've hit a plateau when they don't see progress. And it really comes down to how you define your progress. And for me, I've not snatched more. I haven't got PB in my snatch in 2 or 3 years, I'd say. Now, would I say I've plateaued in my snatch? Not necessarily, because there's been a lot of elements of my snatch that's improved greatly in terms of the speed, the efficiency, and the technique. So I think it really depends on how you're quantifying your progress. If you're going purely off your numbers, then it can be very easy to get to the point where you go, oh, I've plateaued. Whereas, I think goals for Olympic weightlifting especially, or gym related anyway, there needs to be a certain element of them that aren't purely on the number that you're lifting. Although that may seem like the most important, again, if we're talking longevity, what's actually important is the whole movement, and weightlifting is extremely technical. So I'm interested to see whether, and I liken it to this for CrossFit. Okay, so if we're referring purely as plateauing in your snatch, the areas of the snatch that we would talk about would be mobility, speed, obviously outright weight, catch position. And each one of those, just for example, those four are cups. Okay. Yeah. Now, every time you go into a snatch session and you just snatch and you go for a PB, I liken that to just going and sprinkling or pissing over these cups, trying to fill them all up. Okay. And a few sprinkles will land in each cup. But it's a hot day and it'll evaporate. And really, there's no significant improvement across that overall area of your snatch. However, the way in which you need to approach your training, if you're hitting a plateau or getting to the same numbers and not seeing progress, is trying to aim and fill up one area of that cup first significantly before moving on to the next area. So, for example, putting in some consistent practice on developing your strength and positioning on the pool, spending a period of time on a strength program so you develop the strength in that pool. Once you've seen significant improvement in that area, you come back and then go, right, mobility. Snatch mobility was the next area that I'm struggling with. And for this period of time, 4 weeks, say, I'm just going to improve my mobility in my sitting position of the snatch. Once you see significant improvement in that cup, you move on. Once you've gone across all 4 cups or built the base wider, you're now ready then to move on to attempting a new PB. And I think it's just always remembering with Olympic weightlifting that it's an extremely long game and you always have to drop back at periods to build your base up before attempting a PB again. And progressively overloading is great, but you have to periodize your training, your percentages for a longer period of times, the more that you stick in at weightlifting. And 9 times out of 10, especially for beginners, it isn't, like I said, the strength that holds them back. It's the fact that their technique isn't proficient enough. And unfortunately, it's such an ego hit for people to have to go, if your snatch is 100 kilos, for example, to go, right, I need you to jump back to 40 kilos for 6 weeks so that we can focus on your mobility and your technique before we go heavier again. And most people look at me and go, there's no fucking chance I'm going to be snatching 40 kilos for 4 weeks, Sonny, you can fuck off. And I'll go, okay, no problem. And they'll go back and they'll put in another 6 months of training and they may get a 1 kilo improvement in their snatch. Which,
Yeah.
that may be great for them. But if we're talking longevity here, that's not the be all and end all. And that's one of the most difficult things to try and drum into people is to be like, please be patient. Let's just put egos to one side here for a second. Let's drop the weight down. Let's work on your technique. Let's work on the not so sexy stuff, and we'll get you through and past that plateau. But you've got to put the confidence into the people that the process is worth it.
Yeah, no, spot on. I even remember because I had actually serious issues with my LCL and it meant that I pretty much didn't touch a squat for about a year. And I remember going back, whether it was, I think, maybe 5-6 years ago, I was 170, 180. And then I get back on the squat rack and I'm working on my technique. And I remember one of the local S&C coaches that I knew from my school was like, yeah, just do the barbell. I was like, nah, I don't need to do it. He's like, just do the barbell. We're going to have to completely restructure you again.
Let's restructure, let's rebuild. Let's start back from the bottom, rebuild the base. That's it.
Yeah, and I think it's important you mentioned that kind of not having that big ego. And I even had a CrossFit athlete, Roy Stone, on the podcast, and he said one of the most important things in CrossFit, in any gym, is just leave your ego at the door, because no one's perfect at every lift. No one's the best at every lift. There's always something that's going to be not as good as it should be. And you got to be able to just take a coach or someone saying, listen, you're good, but you're not that good, so you need to fix this. So you can't just walk around.
But not only that, even easier than that, Richie, there's always someone out there with a bigger fucking knob than you, a bigger snatch than you. At the end of the day, there's always someone out there. So it doesn't matter if you're world champion. There's always someone out there in the depths of the darts who will be lifting more than you'll be doing better than you. And I think the quicker that you can come to terms with that and not just think small, like big fish, little pond mentality, it makes it much easier to take that step back.
Yeah, no, 100%. And just one of the things here, Sonny, is just now reverting back to kind of yourself as an individual. A few people sent in a few questions with regards to like your own style of training and stuff like that. And one of the questions that was sent on was, say for yourself, when you're lifting heavy, albeit on any, or it could change actually depending on what exercise you're doing, but like they were kind of asking what kind of rep ranges or complexes you'd use before you build up to that max or that 1 rep max.
Yeah, I think, adding Adding variation to the Olympic movements is great if you're training enough. And especially for beginners, and I probably am not helping the cause here, but purely what I do is for entertainment.
Yeah.
But you'll see various different complexes, combining different movements of the Olympic list put together, and people will wonder, oh, I wonder why he's doing that. It is purely for fucking entertainment reasons. It is not anything in particular that I'm doing there by doing the complexes or an array of movements there to develop my technique. However, using combination movements, for example, a simple complex like power snatch, hanger snatch, hack snatch, is going to help you develop a certain level of control over the bar. Using hang snatch as a variation if you're already snatching twice a week is great because you're going to work on a key element of the second phase of the snatch that, you know, probably needs a little bit more attention than the overall product. And what you've always remember is any exercise that isn't the classical movement, i.e. the snatch and the clean and jerk, is there to assist or to improve an element of the classical lift. And because that's ultimately what you want to improve on. And
Yeah.
I think, you know, we can very easily get fixated on improving, getting a massive snatch balance, for example, or getting a massive hang snatch that far exceeds your actual snatch. But you actually end up developing a technique for the hang snatch that is got no relation to what your actual snatch looks like. And therefore, you've just got good at an exercise that is non-existent or something that you don't necessarily compete in. And the whole complex thing came about for me purely on the basis that I got bored of flicking through my Instagram feed and just seeing lots of snatches, lots of heavy snatches. And I want to give people something else that they could watch from a spectator's point of view that was not just showing who could lift the heaviest weight, but showing, you know, a certain element of skill in bar control. But not only that, it allowed people to have a go and practice and try my complexes with the weight that's suitable for them to feel that, you know, they're training in a style that I'm doing, which was really cool to relate with people on that level. But also, like I said, for me, in order to improve my snatch, I had to train for a very long period of time with my whole time and focus and energy towards that goal if I was going to see progress. Whereas, you know, combining a few movements enabled me to get PBs in random movements or exercises a little bit more regular than I would do in my full snatch.
Yeah, which is a blessing in disguise in some cases. And
Yeah.
another question kind of related to that would be, and like this kind of ties into coaching as well. So say when you're having those kind of heavy lifters and those who want to, you know, max out as much as possible and kind of define themselves on the weight they're lifting. Like and this is both as a coach and individual, so feel free to answer both sides of the coin with this question. Like, how long would you feel is kind of ideal, kind of waiting between lifts when you're, say, maxing out? Because, like, I presume you don't just jump straight into your max effort without doing your few warm up, build up sets. But like, how long would you look for, number one, yourself, and then if you're working with someone, what would be the ideal rest time between sets?
Yeah, I think just even before that, in terms of how often someone should be attempting a PB, I think for beginners, obviously, if you're following a program, the rate in which you're going to improve is going to be far quicker. And therefore, you probably do need to test your max every 4 to 6 weeks to actually be working off a PB that's relative at that time, because you'll obviously, if you put a beginner on a 16-week program and they've never done a program before, likelihood is after 4 weeks of progressive overload and consistent practice on a select exercise base, they're going to see improvement. And therefore, by week 8, they're actually far more capable than the weights that they're working off. And therefore, they won't get the full benefit out of the program. Whereas running people on shorter 4-week blocks and letting them test a little bit more frequently is going to mean that they're working off a percentage, a weight far close to what their actual percentage is in that given time. If we're talking now purely on a 1RM max attempt weight, everyone's different in terms of their recovery time. Purely for Olympic weightlifting, because you could lift up to 2 minutes after your last heavy lift in a competition, we would kind of work off that 2 to 3 minutes rest in between your heavy singles. However, 9 times out of 10 for people, that isn't the case. So resting closer 3 to 5 minutes on a submaximal lift would be proficient. However, you just got to take into account the fact that you may go cold if you sit for too long in between your sets. So I guess the key thing for me is, monitoring, I guess, your heart rate, your breathing, to actually see yourself come back down close to a resting level before you go fully exerting yourself again in between sets, which, like I said, for me would be 3 to 5 minutes on a classical lift, but could be closer 5 to 8 minutes on a squat. And, I trained a lot with Australian strength coach, one of the best powerlifting coaches in the world, and he rests nearly up to 11 minutes on his top squatting sets because he has to get his wraps on, etc., which is, seems like a fucking lifetime in between sets, but, that works well for him.
Yeah, horses for courses, I suppose. And one of the last questions just that were sent in, and it's also kind of relatable to myself because I'm kind of currently debating it at the moment, and you yourself, and I'd be intrigued to see if you coach this as well, is like you'd say use the hook grip when you'd be doing your cleans and some other lifts as well. And like for the listeners and even myself, like what does one gain from using that grip and being confident enough to use it on the heavy lifts? Because even myself, I still haven't got there, whether I'm deadlifting, whether I'm doing cleans, I still haven't got to the point where I can use it. I know you need to get the thumb tape, but I'm just not there with it. Like, is that something you'd introduce straight away when coaching? Or would you kind of build it up if people are comfortable with it?
110% hook grip is a non-negotiable for Olympic weightlifting. It's like wearing a fucking helmet when you ride a bike. It is, you must do hook grip.
So you've made up my mind anyway.
Yeah, it is a non-negotiable. It's not even a conversation I'd have with an athlete. Or should we not? You must use hook grip. It enables you to keep your arms relaxed, first of all, which is a key fault for a lot of people when they start with Olympic weightlifting. They try and use their arms instead of their legs, and it causes all sorts of bad technical habits. Not only that, if you don't use hook grip, then you rely on your grip strength, okay? Which means your grip strength, which is going to be far weaker than your leg strength, will then become your limiting factor, which you never want to have a limiting factor being far less than the muscles that actually should be used. Okay, so purely on those two bases alone is good enough reason to use hook grip when you're Olympic lifting. The other thing is as well, in terms of getting over the point of learning how to do it, does hurt and it is uncomfortable to begin with. But over a period of time, you're better off actually, keeping the weights light to the point where it doesn't hurt so much, drill your technique. And then as the weights naturally build up at a smooth progression of your hook grip, you'll actually have had a chance to ingrain a far better technique than you would have just going to the point straight away to where your thumbs are hurting when you're doing it and then swapping back to overgrasp grip. Just to give you an idea, if I was to do a clean grip deadlift, probably isn't my deadlift shit anyway, but you'll still get the comparison. My deadlift without hook grip would be like 160 or 170. My deadlift with hook grip would be 240, 250. So that, it enables me to work a lot heavier and I let the weight sit into the big muscles to lift rather than actually my grip strength being the limiting factor. So I just say for listeners, 100%, again, get on with hook grip. And if after 2 months of hook gripping, you're still in pain, then use thumb tape. But you'll end up hook gripping the fucking your knife and fork by the end of it. It's like it becomes the most natural way to hold things, and also, especially if you're a CrossFitter listening to this, if you can save your grip, your forearm strength from fatiguing with a barbell by hook gripping, if you're combining lifting with gymnastics in a CrossFit workout, you're going to actually be able to hang on to the rig bar for far longer than you would do if you actually toast your grip on dumbbells or with a barbell. before actually making your way to the rig.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because one of the guys I was debating it with was saying that he hooks grips everything, and he's even find himself hook gripping the gear stick in his car. So it's relatable with
Good.
regards to you
There you
mentioning
go.
that about the cutlery. And Sonny, just the pretty much last question or two here, and then I'll let you go. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Just really quickly, just about nutrition. Like, do you find, like, would you be absolutely strict? Because I know, say, some of the CrossFitters that I know, or maybe some professional athletes, it kind of varies up a bit. But like, is there a certain, say, just specifically looking at workout time, like, is there a certain type of food you'd always be looking to have before you'd go and work out that you feel like, right, this will give me a good amount of energy to get through the workout? Or like, how kind of do you approach diets in general with regards to building it around the workout?
Yeah, I think even if we just scrap the workout thing for a minute and
Yeah.
just, I'm just trying to think, from the point of view of the average person that will be listening to this, you're not an Olympic level athlete, you're not an elite level athlete. And the biggest thing for me when it comes to nutrition, the most important thing is that it's something that you can actually stick to. A lot of people will diet for an event, so diet for a holiday or diet for a competition, and they'll slip into eating habits that are just equally as bad as eating fucking chocolate or McDonald's every weekend, to achieve their goal. And it actually becomes something that really isn't sustainable to your life or to your lifestyle. And the thing for me with nutrition is, if however you want to eat, it's got to be something that actually fits into, like I said, your lifestyle. For example, if you've got kids, if you're having every night or every meal of the day, having to cook yourself a separate thing of steamed chicken and broccoli, while your partner has takeaway 2 times a week, and the kids have a completely separate meal, that's going to be great for about 2 weeks before you go, actually, you know what, fuck this, this is too much hard work, and you scrap and go back to doing what you're doing before. So I think the biggest thing for me with nutrition is making sure however you decide to structure your diet, it's something that's actually sustainable and works in with your lifestyle and the people that are around you, and to make very small changes to start with. So, for example, if every day before you go to the gym, you have a chocolate brownie and you fucking love that chocolate brownie and it makes you feel great when you go to the gym, what is it about that chocolate brownie that's making you feel great? Probably the carbohydrates and a little bit of the sugar. Okay, well, obviously having a chocolate brownie every day before training isn't probably going to be the best for you from a diet point of view. However, you could 3 of the 5 days of the week that you have that chocolate brownie, substitute that for a different source of carbs, i.e. some rice and, maybe just some maltodextrin in a shake, or, for example, something like that, that's going to give you the same effect, but not be as bad. If you normally have 2 pints of beer after every training session every day during the week, maybe limit yourself to 3. It's making small changes like that over a period of time will become something that becomes a good habit and part of your identity, rather than something that you just try and change for an event or something really quickly. So the way in which I actually structure dieting for me now is just to eat intuitively. I know having an Indian, as much as I'd love to, 3 nights a week after training isn't going to be the best for me, but I'll have it one night of the week, and the other 2 nights a week I'll cook. I know if I'm sat at home on my laptop all day and I'm not training, I do not need as much food as I do when I do a double training session and I'm coaching all day. So therefore, intuitively, I'll increase calories on that day when I'm training really hard and reduce calories when I'm sedentary or not moving so much during the day. I know if I'm working out, I probably need a little bit more protein for recovery. I'll increase my protein. So I think one of the key takeaway points for me when it comes to nutrition is, first of all, keep it something that you can actually abide to, make small changes, and be intuitive. If don't give yourself, for example, Friday night's cheat night to have a takeaway, but your mates are going out for dinner on a Wednesday, and you go, oh no, sorry, I can't come out on Wednesday because my cheat day is Friday. The more the head fuck that gives you, actually trying to abide to a diet like that will cause you more stress than it will make you gain in your improvement in your performance. I can tell you now, even at my most elite time as an athlete, training for the Olympics, weighing out every single thing that I was eating, timing my meals, portion sizes, I had severe fucking stress and anxiety trying to sustain to that diet, more so than it was actually benefiting me from when I was eating how I want and being happy and feeling good around training. So it's finding that happy balance, and people, I think, underestimate the fact of, how you're actually feeling from food is just as important as, how you're physically looking. And that's what I say to people. But at the end of the day, my machine, my body is performance. It's not aesthetic. So therefore, making sure that I'm basing off how I feel in my training sessions as to judging whether I'm getting enough calories or not based on what the scale is, rather than basing it off the scale or how I look in the mirror, is far more important.
Yeah, no, I'd agree. It's well said. And as a guy who went toe to toe with many bloody diets, it was actually the kind of sustained one that wasn't as dramatic was the one that tended to work actually the best.
Yeah, and probably one that you're actually still sticking to now, or
Yeah.
or at least employing elements of.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm very for me, I can eat the same thing at pretty much every single day. So I get a food prep company. I have 4 eggs on one slice of toast for breakfast for 5 days of the week. One day of the week I won't have breakfast, and the other day of the week I'll have a smoothie for breakfast, or 2 days a week I have a smoothie. I then eat 3 of my meals, which are each 500 calories each throughout the day. And on days where I don't train, I have 2. And then my evening meal is fairly rounded. It'll be whatever I'm having with the missus. 2 nights a week we'll have fish. 2 nights of the meat I have white meat. 1 night of the week I have red meat, and 1 night of the week I don't have meat at all. And then I'll always have fairly rounded fats and carbs.
Yeah.
And I will have a fucking beer on the weekend if I want one.
Exactly.
And a takeaway.
Yeah, here to that. And yeah, so lastly here, it's only just last question here. Someone sent it in before we obviously wrap things up is, and it is kind of a topic that is heavily discussed, is just the warm-up. And it's one thing that even myself, I sometimes might get to the gym and just be like, screw it, I'm going straight into it. In an ideal world, it's like golf rather than arriving.
Jenkins.
Yeah, rather than rocking up to the first tee 2 minutes before tee time and just scripping and ripping it. Like, what's kind of your stance on the warm-up? Like, do you have a go-to warm-up that you religiously do? And then also, while kind of answering that, like, why do you feel it's something that is kind of ignored in the industry across the board? I'm not saying by the top people, but in general, it seems to be kind of not viewed as important.
First of all, why I think it's avoided is purely because if you're booked into a class that starts at 6 o'clock, naturally you'll arrive at the gym 5 to 6 for the training session, and therefore arrive straight in, and you expect that your class is going to warm you up specifically for your own needs for the session, which it's not. And that's the problem for, a lot of people is at the end of the day, if you're going to classes, unless you've got a PT, that session is broad and it's not specific to your individual needs. So, and you've not only that, you've not made time to work on your individual needs outside of the session class. So that's why generally I think, warm-ups will be missed. And, just on that point, if you know that there's areas that you struggle a lot more on than other people's in the class, you've got to get in and make your own time to correct those issues or to warm up or to mobilize those things before you get into the class. And, for me, in terms of how I approach my warm-ups, I go, first of all, right, what am I doing today? Okay, I'm doing overhead work or jerks or clean and jerk. I'm going to spend some time mobilizing my front rack position and warming up my shoulders, because they're the 2 key areas that are going to be under fire in this training session. So therefore, I'll dictate my warm-up based on what's in the session. But not only that, like for me, I always recommend mobility, increasing range of motion as a good form of warming up for Olympic weightlifting if you don't have that range of motion. If you do, then we still warm up and mobilize. We still stretch out the bottom positions that we're going to get in, but we'll then add the element of load. And therefore, we're developing strength and stability through that full range and using that as a form of warm-up. So, for example, if I'm put this in a term that my listeners will understand, for example, if I'm doing snatch in my session, I would use an exercise like snatch balance or overhead squats under load to warm up for my snatch session. Now, as well, if I'm snatching and my goal is to get to 80% in that day for 5 working sets, where I always work backwards from my end goal, and I'd go 75%, 70, 65%, 60, 50, 40%. Okay. And that'll be my six to 8 warm up sets before I get to my working set. And this is the thing, a good point to finish on. Like 9 times out of 10, when I go into gyms and you see people warming up, they'll use the empty bar and then they'll just go to grab the tens to put on the bar to start their session on snatch. And I'll go up to most people and I'll go, oh, okay, what's your PB on snatch? And they'll be like, oh, 65. Okay, so you've just put 40 kilos on the bar. So what's that as a percentage? You're well over fucking 50% on your first set. Whereas when I'm using 40 kilos for my first set as a percentage of my 160 kilo snatch, it's very small. So if you actually think about warming up as percentages, leading up to your working sets, your top weights, that means you've got to go and grab the biscuits off the fucking rack, collecting dust, and put them on the bar first, and do a few sets with the biscuits on, and then the 2.5s, and then the 5s. And then when you say that to people, they go, "Oh, but that's fucking gay." Yeah. Well, unfortunately, that's exactly the same as what I'm doing, but relative to our percentages. And therefore, you're actually going to get the opportunity to ingrain a consistent movement pattern, warming up, as opposed to jumping to 60% and already getting straight into a substandard technique, just so people think you're hard because you got the big weights on your first set.
Yeah, well said. I have been guilty of that during my time, but
we've all been fucking guilty.
We've all been there.
We have all been guilty. I've been there. I want to put the reds on first set to look hard. Does it make me hard? No. It just hurts a few more sets before they start to warm up. I'm not gaining anything by doing that.
Yeah, no, I hear you. And just to finish here, Sonny, I do a quick fire question where some people send on their quick fire questions and I mix in some of my own. There's only about 5 or 6 here. So first thing that pops into your head, feel free. And I always say if there's anything incriminating said, we can always edit it. But I haven't had to do that yet in about 60-something episodes. So fingers crossed. So this was kind of an obscure one because I'm sure everyone knows what you're up to on a snatch and cleans and stuff. But what is your PB for bench and deadlift?
150 bench and 240 deadlift.
British office or US office?
British.
Your favourite film of all time?
Oh, God, that's so hard. Probably Leonardo DiCaprio. One of his films is great film. Shutter Island, Catch Me If You Can, Wolf of Wall Street.
Yeah, just done a few bangers.
Done a few bangers. Yeah. I could go all day.
What is your go-to coffee in a cafe or coffee shop?
It would be an almond flat white double shot.
And what is your handicap in golf, if you have one?
It used to be 2 when I stopped playing golf. I could probably still play to 9.
Okay, solid going. And second last one is your favourite CrossFit athlete and why?
Probably going to be Noah Olsen, just purely on the basis that he's such a friendly guy. He's always accommodating. He's funny. I like his work ethic, and he's a very personable guy who has an incredible work ethic, and he's really friendly and always makes you want to smile when you're training or around him.
And the person who actually asked me that, if you could quickly answer, did you ever think about getting into CrossFit properly?
I've done CrossFit before. I still train CrossFit 3 days a week. Still love it. Would I do it competitively? Not till I'm at the point where I've got no other focuses and I could eat, sleep, and train like I was going to train for the games. Other than that, I'll just continue to do it recreationally and enjoy it.
Cool. And lastly, sum yourself up in 3 words.
Driven, funny, and affectionate.
Well said, well said. Well, Sonny, listen, thanks a million for taking time out of your evening to have a chat. I know we're on different scales of the time scale, but we got it done in the end. So I want to thank you
No
for that.
problem at all. Thank you very much for having me on. I think, it's been great to give the guys something a little bit different than what a podcast's about before. And yeah, I hope the listeners have enjoyed this. And just before I go, I just want to say, if anyone that's listening does want to maybe give my academy a try or wants help getting into the sport of Olympic weightlifting, do not be afraid to drop me a message on Instagram at Sonny Webster GB. You can also start a free trial at my academy, which has got all my different training programs on within it via sonnywebster.com. But like I said, if you ever need anything help from me or some direction on what you feel would be best to start with, then please just hit me up on Instagram. But of course, have a look through my page as well. There's always lots of cool free content in there for you to learn from as well.
For sure. And I'll attach all the links below on my different links and on the different platforms. So make sure you check them out. And listen, Sonny, enjoy the rest of your day. Looking forward to seeing what
Thanks, brother Andrew.
The future holds. And thanks again for coming on.
Cheers, buddy. Take care.